We are at the end of our series here on following Jesus, and we've brought in the expert on following Jesus to explain to us why it's so hard and to tell us how to do better.
Sure.
I mean, it's difficult for us to imagine as we think through history and we think about all the Christians who have committed atrocities while at the same time proclaiming faith in Jesus and often using that faith to further perpetuate atrocities. So we think of the Nazi regime or crusaders who slaughtered Muslims and Jews during the Crusades. And that all seems completely counter to the ethics of Jesus as we understand them. And so we used to talk about, the Crusades. That was hundreds of years ago. Things are different now. But the Nazis weren't that long ago.
That's right.
And there are still Nazis around today. And so those folks are unfortunately very much like us. And major movements of theology that influence us today were already well underway back then. And so there seems to be really no excuse. So we only have to look around at the news, as we've seen in recent years, and now we can look at all the number of high-profile Christians, especially those in power, who have succumbed to moral failure, sometimes sexual, financial in nature, or who've acted in some way to abuse their power, to abuse people in their care. But beyond the famous and infamous, we're faced with ethical concerns on a daily basis. Though we want to follow Jesus, we often find that it's harder than we ever thought it would be when we walk the aisle or get baptized. So with all that in mind, why?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to follow Jesus. I mean, if it were easy, everyone would do it, I guess. But Ray did tell me on the phone that he wanted me to just tell you how to do it. So I guess you're supposed to call me if you have an ethical concern. All I can tell you really is why it's hard.
Can we put your number at the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, put my number at the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
I'll make all your decisions for you. You definitely don't want that. So David Gushee in his book talks about 4 reasons why this is so hard for us to do. And the first reason is because reason itself is not pure. We often think about ethics as let's have some principles and let's apply those principles directly and then we'll always make the right decisions. But our reason is corrupted. It's not always pure. We are called Homo sapiens, wise humans. But that's not really what we are, maybe in comparison to some other creatures, but we aren't that wise all the time. We find it very difficult to apply pure reason because our bodies get in the way, our emotions get in the way, our experiences get in the way. I mean, if you're hungry or you're tired, do you make good decisions? No, right? If you're anxious or depressed, do you make good decisions? I mean, reason is not something that can be abstracted as a pure thing we follow to always get the right result. And we're really prone to deluding ourselves. We're really prone to self-deception, to rationalization, to making a decision and then coming up with the reason we made that decision after the fact to try and justify ourselves. This is just common human behavior. I mean, rather than Homo sapiens, maybe we should be Homo perplexus. We are not wise. We are perplexed. We are confused. We are easily deluded in our own reason. And this is one reason why it's just really hard. We can't just simply take our brains and apply them in a pure way. That reason just doesn't always hold up.
And it's also that we misunderstand who we are and how we're made.
Yeah.
The Enlightenment taught us that, I think, therefore I am, which is very individualistic, it's creating the world through the mind, and that's not reality.
Yeah.
I've probably quoted this book to y'all and others way too many times, but the book How to Think, I think, or How We Think by Alan Jacobs, who's a Baylor professor, Sikkim Bears.
Yeah.
He's a Baylor professor of philosophy, and he talked about how we think in groups.
Mm.
And so anytime I'm thinking up an idea, I'm also, whether I realize it or not, I'm also thinking about how that idea corresponds with how other people think, that I'm deeply connected to, church, colleagues, home, wherever. And so we think in groups, and it's not just all based on reason right in front of us, but there's more to all these reasons that we justify ourselves in there.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you think about the Wesleyan quadrilateral, which is the way Wesleyans think about how we interpret Scripture, reason is only one part of that, because they were very smart. The early Wesleyans saying, we can't just assume a reason tells us everything we need to know. So that's one reason why it's really hard to make good ethical decisions. And our perceptions are often distorted. So we are not always seeing the world exactly as it is. And the reason we know this is the case is that if there is an objective reality, I see one thing and you see something else. Mm-hmm. So clearly, either one of us is not seeing exactly as things are, or both of us are not seeing exactly as things are. Our perceptions are colored by so many outside factors, things that don't have to do with what reality actually is. We want to be discerning people, but we all have blind spots. There's no way around that. We all have blind spots. Discernment, moral discernment, right, is a hard thing to get around. I mean, I know for me, what I find hard with discernment, I always think the best of people. I tend to always believe that people are representing themselves accurately and fairly to me and truthfully. And in some ways I like that. Like, I like that I'm pretty optimistic and open to people. But there have definitely been times when I did not realize people did not have my best interests at heart, because I have this blind spot based on my own psychological makeup, the experiences I've had, whatever. I have this blind spot in my discernment. And that can be true for all sorts of things, our decision making as well. Our perceptions just are not 100% accurate all the time. Geshe talks about moral vision. He talks about how we perceive power. And boy, can that really mess with your perception. If you were a person, so let's imagine you live in a culture in which monarchs are assumed to rule by divine right, right? That's going to shape how you view power and how power and authority gets used around you. You're going to defend a lot of things that you wouldn't defend if you didn't think they had the divine right to do it, right? It's how we view threat, what we find to be existential threats. So I think we see that a lot in our country in the way people talk about immigrants, because they see this threat of people who are unlike us, and they feel existentially threatened, and so they lash out at those people. And it's also about how we think change happens. So if we are people who tend to think all change is good progress, that's going to change how we view the things that are in front of us. We're not going to think critically about how this progress, affects people. So there are all these ways our perceptions are colored by who we are and the world that we live in, which kind of brings us to this third point, which is that we are living in context. Like, we don't just live, like as you said, individually by ourselves, with no other factors. I mean, you have to think about who Jesus was. Jesus was a man living in the ancient Near East. It was an agrarian society, mostly subsistence farming. He was shaped by his faith. It was a deeply patriarchal society. The religious structure was very much hierarchical. They were oppressed people who lived at the thumb of a very powerful empire. He was a man. He was a son. He was a carpenter. He was a traveling teacher. All these pieces of him, that context shapes who he is. Well, the same thing is true for us. And I'm a woman and a daughter and a mother and a sister, and I'm a minister, and all of these things are shaping me. I live in this culture, this capitalistic culture, in a free nation. I mean, I know some of us are a little concerned right now, but we live in a free nation, right? Like, these things are going to shape how we think about our ethics, what we think we are allowed to do or permitted to do, or indeed pushed to do, compelled to do. And so these ways we live in context will shape us, inform us, and these values that we might think are coming from something pure inside us are actually being shaped deeply by the context that we live in.
And there's good in all this too,
right? Absolutely.
I mean, there's gifts of perception. It's when we overreach those bounds, don't you think,
Yes.
that we really
Yeah.
get into trouble? When we don't realize that, I can only see so far,
Right.
and maybe I don't have the perception that you have, and so we need we need to figure it out together and like listen to different voices. And when you begin to universalize your own experience, then that becomes problematic. But what else? But there's more here, isn't there?
There's more. We worship idols. This is very churchy to say, but we do. When we look at the Hebrew Bible, this is the sin, right? This is the thing that that God says, this is going to mess you up, and it always does. And for us, the idols can be principles, right? They can be things like unchecked nationalism. They can be things like a family first mentality that ignores other things that are going on around us. They can be a tendency to worship money and things, which I think in our culture is very, very hard to resist. I mean, we don't think we're idolizing these things, but the fact is that what you're spending your time and attention on is where your heart is pointed. And for so many of us, because we live in this society that is, about, you've got to have all this money, because if you don't, it's not just about having it now. We're all afraid of the future, right? We fear what's going to happen to us when we're older. And so, it's easy for us to worship things that are not meant to be worshiped. It's easy for us to, to put up the golden calf and not think about it that way. And so we always have to be conscious of where our hearts are pointed when we're making decisions. Are we making this decision from because it works for us financially, but maybe ethically it's not correct? Or are we making this decision because we have some kind of priority that we're placing over the Jesus-shaped ethics we want to live? It's just really hard. It's just really hard. Yeah.
I'm going to make an unpopular biblical claim here.
Do it.
But sometimes I wonder if we place so much emphasis on the first sin committed in Genesis, that we really lose a sense that that the main sin that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is focused on is the golden calf and everything that happens afterward. And so, there's very little reference. There's few references to those early chapters in Genesis throughout the rest of the Bible. But throughout the rest of the Bible, what is referenced over and over and over again is the Exodus, the golden calf, the mistrust or the trusting of the wrong things. And that is, and so whenever we go back to those early chapters of Genesis, it's important, I think, that we read them through the lens of Exodus so that we get that focus right. There ends the biblical lesson. But just to remember that idolatry is the big one. And we all do it. And we have to continually, as we mature spiritually, we have to continue that practice of letting those idols go and letting them fall away and trusting that there is a greater God beyond it.
I personally think that so much of what we, because it's not just, I think we think of idolatry as, bowing down before something, and it's not just the act of idolatry, it's what it produces in us over time, right? Like, so one of the reasons that the Hebrew people get into trouble so much is because of the way they mistreat the poor, the foreigner, the sojourner in their land. They're not taking care of the widow or the orphan, right? Well, why is that? Because they're more worried about the existential threat of the foreigner, right? They're more worried about their own financial security than they are about hospitality to a neighbor or whatever. So idolatry leads us to many, many other things. So I think you're right in saying that if we look at it through that lens, right, idolatry leads us into all sorts of sin. It's not its own abstracted kind of like, don't bow down to that thing, right? It leads us into all sorts of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Geshe lays out 4, but I have a 5th reason why I think this is really hard. And that's because our world is very complex. I would never say that Jesus lived in an easier time. Certainly not. But it was a very different time. And so very often we're looking to Jesus to answer questions that Jesus didn't have to answer at that time. And so we're trying to infer principles from Jesus's ethics that we can apply to now. I mean, talk about artificial intelligence or, assisted reproductive technology.
That was not covered in the Gospel of Mark.
No. Like, so I think part of our problem is that we have these really complex modern issues that we're trying to look back and make inferences. And anytime you're making an inference, you're subject to all of that other stuff, the perception distortion, the idolatry, all of those things, right? Our world is very, very complex. And so making those decisions can be really hard for us. So I want to the question, of course, now is like, okay, so what, right? That's great. Tell us all the things that are wrong. But I want to take a case study. So Exodus 20 tells us, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, right? And we have often interpreted that to mean don't lie, right? Don't tell tales. Don't lie. Don't be untruthful, right? And it would be easy to take that commandment and say, all right, that's the ethic. Jesus talks about the truth setting you free, right? Truthfulness is a value. And we think, okay, well, the answer to that is never lie. But in the book of Joshua, spies come into Jericho to see if they're going to be able to defeat the people in this land of promise. And they meet, we won't talk about how they meet the prostitute Rahab, make your own inferences there. And
this is adult Bible study.
This is adult Bible study, it's okay.
Yeah.
So they go to see Rahab, and they're about to get caught. The spies are about to get caught. And so Rahab lies. Now she lies for her own purposes, right? She's trying to keep herself safe when the Israelites finally come in. But she lies in order to keep the spies safe. And so the spies get away, everything's happy, clappy, whatever. I was in a Bible study one time where the pastor was talking about this, and some of the people in the Bible study just could not get past the fact that she lied. But she lied. Lying is wrong. How? And the reason we know that this is not just, one example that we're supposed to forget about is that Rahab shows up in the New Testament.
Yeah.
A couple of times, like in Hebrews and in James, where she is lauded and praised as someone who took care of these spies in their midst, right? So lying, right, had its use. We think about the Holocaust. The people who hid Jews in the Holocaust, they were lying. People would come to their door and say, we heard that there are Jews here. And they would say, no, they're not. I mean, they were lying. There were forged documents. There were all these kinds of things. There were lies. And it's that kind of stuff where we get stuck ethically, right? Because we want to apply this this particular be truthful
Mm-hmm.
thing that makes it very difficult. One of the ways that I've tried to begin thinking about ethical decisions is what builds community and what breaks community. So when you think about Rahab and her lying, right, it was for the protection of these people, right?
Mm-hmm.
The building of a community in which she would eventually take part. Or the people who were defending the lives of Jews. It's about building this community and creating something that does not break the community, which is what the Nazis wanted to do, right? They wanted to eliminate an entire race of people. So we're going to, a little case study, something I did, and I still don't know if I did the right thing. So you guys can debate it after you watch the video. So a few years ago, I was driving, and I got rear-ended. And we pulled off into the parking lot, and the person who got out of this truck, which had like new truck tags, it wasn't brand new, but obviously it had just been bought, was a 15-year-old Mexican boy. And I knew from his accent that he was not like somebody who'd grown up here thoroughly Americanized, right? This is obviously an immigrant. Well, before the police could even get there, he had called his parents. His parents came. Mom doesn't speak any English. He has an older brother who's 19. And the dad says to me, first of all, we're going to take care of everything. He said, there's no insurance on this truck because we literally bought it yesterday. So there's no insurance. So I know I'm probably going to have to go through my insurance. And he says to me, no, listen, I work for a body shop. We're going to take care of it. Don't worry about it. You can call right now. You can make sure. You don't have to be afraid. And I was like, great. Whew. All right, good. And he says, however.
There it is.
However. Yeah. He said, this is not he didn't use the term quid pro quo, but he made it clear, this is not, we're going to take care of it no matter what you choose to do here. But he said, if my 15-year-old gets caught having driven without a license and having a wreck, this is going to be a huge problem for our family. I want you to say that the 19-year-old was driving the car. And I said, I am not comfortable. I'm just not comfortable with this. And he said, I understand. He said, if you can't do it, you can't do it. But I just really, and he sort of starts telling me just a little bit more about their family and what they've been going through. And I'm really struggling because, number one, I'm a Christian. I don't lie. I don't lie. That's part of my ethics. I'm going to be truthful. Right. And secondly, I'm American. I don't lie to law enforcement, right? That's very ingrained, right? Yeah. That's one of those contextual things that is just in me. You don't lie to law enforcement.
Right.
And so that's happening at the moment. But here's the larger context. It's in a community where there have been recent ICE raids. And in the process of those immigration enforcements that have been happening, I've been at some meetings where they've been talking about how law enforcement treat immigrants in their community. And I'm aware of this larger context that I don't know if the officer coming, how they're going to treat this family. Mm. And I was very afraid, and I thought, I don't know what to do because I don't know if I'm going to put these people in a position that's going to make it difficult for them to live here. I don't know how they're going to be treated by law enforcement. I don't know what to do. So when the police officer got there, he came to me first. I resorted to the passive voice. I was rear-ended. He said, what happened? I said, I stopped at this, I had to stop short at this light because the person in front of me stopped short and I was rear-ended. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, can you get me your documents? And I said, okay, they're in the car. And I just walk over and start to get my documents, and he asks them what happened. And they lied. And I was not there. And I have struggled with that ever since. Should I have corrected that lie? Mm-hmm. It's really hard for me to know, given that larger context, whether allowing the lie to stand was right or wrong. Had I not had that larger context of the way immigrants were treated in that community, I might have made a very different decision. That's why decision making is hard, right? Because you don't just have your principle and a situation. You also always have this larger context. Why is it so hard? Well, lots of reasons. And good luck to you out there. It is worth examining our choices. It is worth thinking through, how would Jesus respond to this? We all loved the bracelets, like what would Jesus do? But I don't know. Jesus was never rear-ended. On a donkey, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, that's not a story we know.
No, exactly. So these are complicated questions, but they're worth wrestling with. Not only for the sake of those individual decisions, but for the sake of our character being formed into the likeness of Christ. And so I hope that that's what you'll continue to do. Go ethics.
Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah.
All right, y'all have a lot to talk about. Tell us what you come up with.